Thank you for inviting me to be with you today. 28 years, 8 months, and 4 days ago, I made the most important decision of my life. I stopped drinking. I'm deeply grateful to my elder son, Fred, who was then 10 years old. He held up a mirror to my alcoholic self, asking in the most innocent way, "Dad, you're a drunkard, aren't you?" That struck me to my core. Within the week, I enrolled myself in the Kaiser Chemical Dependency Recovery Program in Oakland. Soon I had a second reason to be very grateful. Dr. Breyer, then the head of the program, did my intake interview and then gave me a choice of attending either religious or secular support groups. I'd been an altar boy in an Episcopalian church in high school, and I kind of got my fill of religion. So I chose the secular groups. And then I had a third reason for gratitude. A secular meeting existed in my town, started and maintained by a convener, Carl S. If Carl hadn't been there, I don't know that I'd be sober or even alive today. Going to support group meetings wasn't easy. I'd never been to a recovery support group before, and I kind of freaked out when people in the room said they were alcoholics and addicts. I wasn't ready to adopt that label just yet. My kid calling me a drunkard, that I could own, but alcoholic seemed like a bridge too far. Well, I got used to it. It wasn't that easy in treatment either. The counselors would ask the class, "And how many 12-step groups have you gone to this week?" And we'd say, "None." The counselor would give us a dirty look and start a lecture. Then we'd quickly add, "But we went to 2 LifeRing meetings." Oh, it so happened that the cluster of us who went to the secular meetings stayed sober, while 12-step attendees dropped like flies all around us. So after a while, the treatment counselors got used to us. Now the question they ask is, how many outside support group meetings have you attended? That's better. There's still resistance from many treatment programs to a secular approach, as many of you know from experience. But as we demonstrate by our own sobriety, and as research studies have verified, our approach is effective in maintaining sobriety. So long as we stay sober, the castle gates of resistance will sooner or later open up. LifeRing has been a good fit for me. Even though I'm kind of the lone wolf type, I felt very comfortable in LifeRing meetings, thousands of them. If I stay on course, I'll celebrate 29 years clean and sober on October 2nd this year. I really like the basic LifeRing philosophy. You've probably heard about it already, so I'll be quick. It's sobriety, secularity, and self-help, the 3 S's. The most important to me is sobriety, the first. Sobriety in LifeRing, as you know, means complete abstinence from the drugs of addiction. All of them. Quitting alcohol but continuing marijuana or cocaine is not sobriety, and it isn't recovery. We allow narrow exceptions for medically prescribed pharmaceuticals under limited conditions. You can read about that in the Convener Handbook, How Was Your Week, at page 201. But in everyday life, abstinence means zero, absolute zero. In my mind, the voices of addiction do not enjoy equal democratic rights. When I hear them, and even after this many years they're still down in there, I shut them down quick and hard. I do not engage in internal discussions about the relative merits of sobriety versus drinking drugging. That case is closed. Every decision gets tested against the criterion of sobriety. If a choice helps sobriety, it's okay. If it weakens sobriety, it's dead. Sometimes that's not easy. I was in a long-term relationship with a codependent. When I got sober, she tried to drag me into relapse. I had to end that relationship. That hurt, but it was a matter of survival. Sobriety has to be the priority, always and in every way. That's my understanding of the first S of the LifeRing philosophy. I wouldn't be alive today without it. In my opinion, tobacco also needs to be included in that list of addictive drugs, and I hope that LifeRing will get around to that. Secularity, the second S, is a way of affirming that you and I have the power to get and stay clean and sober. The claim that we're powerless over alcohol is fake. My life experience teaches me that the power to recover from alcoholism lies within me. I don't need to play at surrender, confess insanity, or fantasize a higher power. If God exists and cares at all, he or she helps those who help themselves. LifeRing, I've found, includes people of many faiths and none, all united by the belief that recovery is our own responsibility and lies within our human power. The third S, self-help or self-direction as it's also put, follows directly. Numerous studies of the recovery process, including in treatment programs, underline the necessity for individualized approaches. One size fits all doesn't work. People recover when and because they figure out what it takes for them as individuals to lead new and sober lives. And that's different for different people. LifeRing is the only organized recovery approach that embraces rather than fights against this fundamental truth. In our meeting format and in our Recovery by Choice workbook, you can build a personal recovery program, a PRP, that works for you. There's another simpler way to visualize how LifeRing works. In other words, recovery in LifeRing means empowering your sober self. It's like an internal revolution, except it's really a restoration. You're dumping the acquired addict overlay and restoring the sober self that is the original and authentic you. By participating in LifeRing, you can help not only yourself but also others. You can do more than sharing hours a week. You can become a LifeRing convener and be there for others who need that meeting. That means not only acting as a facilitator in meetings, but also working behind the scenes to set up meeting space and time, to let people know about LifeRing and its online and printed resources, and to maintain contact with the LifeRing Service Center. Sustaining LifeRing, like any other volunteer nonprofit, is lots of work and involves expenses. A handful of people have given countless hours of their time to make it come this far. Here's a photo of the 24 who founded LifeRing as a national organization in Florida in February 2001. Please show your appreciation by joining in with your time and money to help LifeRing keep growing. Helping others might very well fortify your own recovery. I've mentioned the resistance we sometimes encounter to the LifeRing approach. That's real, but the biggest obstacle to progress may lie within ourselves. We've had it drummed into us from all kinds of sources that as alcoholics, addicts, we're an inferior class of people. We've sometimes internalized that stigma, and it can depress and paralyze us. The core of that stigma comes from the legacy disease model of alcoholism. This model teaches that we alcoholics are defective in every way, spiritually, morally, mentally, and genetically. And it's these defects that made us into out-of-control drinkers. I analyzed this model in a talk a few years ago. I couldn't say it better today, so here it is again. The three pillars of what passes for a medical disease concept in most of people's minds today are: one, that alcoholism is a spiritual disease which can only be cured by spiritual enlightenment involving surrender to a higher power. Two, that individuals become alcoholics because of their moral shortcomings and other serious defects of personality. And three, that alcoholics cannot help it because of their genetic constitution. Not one of these points has a scientific basis. Let's take a short peek. Countless laboratory studies for the last 60 years have shown that not only human beings who may or may not have a spiritual life, but also lower mammals, dogs, monkeys, cats, mice, rats, and invertebrates such as fruit flies and nematodes can be turned into addicts to the addictive drugs by the simple expedient of saturating their bloodstreams with addictive substances, non-lethal level, for a given period of time. They then begin to demonstrate all the behavioral and neurochemical traits of an addicted human being, which makes them ideal subjects for studies of alcoholism and other addiction. And yet, the concept of spiritual disease as applied to these beings has no meaning. Clearly, something else is at work other than in the spiritual dimension. Secondly, the notion that addiction is a consequence of certain personality traits has been thoroughly deflated by more than 50 years of psychometric studies. We have instruments to measure every kind of personality trait, and every effort to predict addiction on the basis of pre-addiction personality traits has come up blank. Every type of personality is about equally liable to become addicted if they put addictive substances into their body. Finally, the belief in the genetic roots of addiction, a darling of the 1930s eugenics movement, has not survived modern genetic research. Within the past 14 years, we have for the first time had the tools to actually look at the human genome instead of guessing about it, and to compare the DNA of healthy individuals with the DNA of people who are defined as alcoholics. The results have swept away the myth that there exists an alcoholism gene that relentlessly drives the alcoholic to the bottle and thus to doom. This belief is complete bunk and has no scientific basis. Bottom line, the religious, psychomoralistic, geneticist content of the legacy disease concept is without scientific merit. It ranks among the greatest corporate frauds of the 20th century. I'm going to argue here that the cure for the legacy medical model is real medicine. I believe that discarding the medical model as a whole would be throwing out the baby with the bathwater. What's needed to cure fake medicine is real medicine. In the past couple of decades, a tremendous amount of research into the nature of addiction has been done, and has not been in vain. This research has produced a solid and growing body of positive findings. We now know with medical certainty that certain substances, including alcohol, enter into and remodel the normal brain. Most of us have been exposed to diagrams showing brain cells like separate pods with little dots of neurochemicals passing between them, or to PET scans showing areas of the brain lighting up when addictive chemicals are present. Some of these presentations are more effective than others. Some are just plain ridiculous. But don't miss the basic message. The substance does bad things to you. The problem lies in the substance,
not in you. That's a gigantic step forward, even a revolutionary step compared to the 1930s disease model. The cornerstone of a genuine medical model of addiction is to understand that addiction is the product of the pharmacology of a certain class of substances, such as alcohol, tobacco, etc., that we call habit-forming, or more accurately, addictogenic. Once we understand that addiction is caused by addictive substances, then we can relieve the patient of religious, moral, psychologistic, spiritual, and geneticists' judgments. The case is similar to a chronic chemical poisoning. Fundamentally, the patient needs to stop the ingestion of these substances. If you have arsenic poisoning, stop taking arsenic. You're not a bad person. You just put some bad stuff into your body. So, stop putting the stuff in your body, and you will be a good person again. It's a little simple, but you know, sometimes these complicated questions at bottom are simple questions.
Note that rejection of the legacy disease model is not rejection of medical analysis. On the contrary, the cure for the legacy disease model is a modern medical model based on evidence. The evidence is that there is no safe level of alcohol consumption, and high levels of consumption risk life-changing damage to a number of organs, including the brain. Disease is not the cause of alcoholism. Rather, alcohol is the cause of disease. The basic point is that we are not inferior or defective people. This is really something that was understood long ago, but has been forgotten. Let me quote a voice from an era when the biggest organization in recovery was secular, and when the legacy disease model hadn't been invented yet. This is the voice of Abraham Lincoln, the future president, addressing an assembly of the Washingtonian Temperance Society in Springfield, Illinois in 1842. He said, "In my judgment, such of us as have never fallen victims have been spared more from the absence of appetite than from any mental or moral superiority over those who have. Indeed, I believe if we take habitual drunkards as a class, their heads and their hearts will bear an advantageous comparison with those of any other class. There seems ever to have been a proneness in the brilliant and the warm-blooded to fall into this vice. The demon of intemperance ever seems to have delighted in sucking the blood of genius and of generosity." In describing the class of habitual drunkards as having heads and hearts no worse than the average, and as including persons of brilliance and passion, genius and generosity, Lincoln surely wasn't romanticizing inebriety or minimizing the wreckage it caused. He was affirming that persons who fall prey to addiction are in no way inferior to the rest, and that addiction can happen to the best. He was seeing the warm, worthwhile human beings inside the addict, the S inside the A. Modern addiction science has fully sustained this view. As you go forward from this meeting out into the world, you can be confident that the LifeRing approach has a solid scientific foundation. Individualized treatment based on personal recovery programs is the key to effective therapy. This is what mainstream addiction science will look like in 10 or 20 years as the partisans of the legacy model age out. Keep in mind also what demographic studies tell us about the rising generations and their religious affiliation. The largest and fastest growing religious denomination by far is none of the above. At the same time, consumption of alcohol and other addictive drugs has not gone away, far from it. The new generations are going to need recovery support, lots of it, and the non-religious atmosphere of the LifeRing meeting is going to be the most comfortable, most effective, and most sustainable environment for them. In short, fellow LifeRingers, stay sober, be of good cheer, work hard, be bold, be confident. LifeRing is the future.